Hello guys, it is I, Stradh von Zarovich, the famous Count Vampire for Dungeons and Dragons. You may have seen me in a number of D&D expansions or modules, including the original um, Curse of Strahd, rather the new Curse of Strahd, and the original module for Dungeons and Dragons First Edition. But I'm not here to talk about any of those. Happy Halloween! It is October 31st, 2021, and on this haunting day of fantasy and horror, I am here to talk about second edition once again. The D&D second edition, specifically continuing our ongoing video series on some of the best um, supplements for the core game. So we've talked about supplements for fifth edition, uh, fourth and third, and today I'm excited to say we get to one of my favorite versions of the game. So without further ado, let's talk about supplements for Dungeons and Dragons second edition. Haha. Hey guys, well, I want to thank Count von Zarovich for taking time out on this busy Halloween time. You know, it's a busy time of year for vampires, witches, and ghouls. And so he was kind enough to pay us a visit here on the old Noob DM channel on Halloween, where we are discussing our second edition, our favorite second edition supplements as part of our video series. And I today I want to talk about second edition supplements. Specifically, I want to talk about Dragonlance. And I'm kind of cheating a little bit here with Dragonlands Adventures, which you see on the screen. And it's Dragonlands Adventures is a supplement really that came out in 1987. So it's not technically part of first edition, but it's on the board, part of second edition rather. It's really more of a first edition um, campaign setting or source book, but source book for the Dragonlance campaign setting by Tracy Hickman and Margaret Wise. Very famous. Almost every D&D player has heard of Dragonlance and the Dragonlance series. It's actually based on a book of a series of novels. There was a trilogy that happened, and then the trilogy of novels, actual books that TSR put out, published in the late 80s, early 90s to pick an interest in the Dragonlance adventure settings, and they made a bunch of modules that went along for gamers, for D&D gamers to that were playing in the late stages of first edition and early stages of the second edition version of the game. And a second edition, as you probably all know, if you follow this channel or follow my videos, or seen any of my videos before that, is one of, if not my favorite, one of my very favorite early versions of Dungeons and Advanced Dungeons and Dragons AD&D. I really grew up. I picked up a number of the first edition books and played it for a little while. Then kind of forgot about the hobby for a while. And when this second edition came out in the late 90s, it was really an early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, 89 or so. I wasn't really playing it anymore. I was busy with college and other life-related things. But I do remember how there was an uproar in the gaming community because people were, there's always like an uproar, or there's always like pushback. People didn't rarely accept the change to second edition all that readily, or it wasn't like a favorable thing for them because they thought they were going to change the game. But actually, if you look through this second edition core book, especially the player's handbook, they did, I think, in my opinion, a really great job of streamlining the game, because first edition had become so cumbersome. I mean, you have like over a dozen core books and campaign books, and then you have all the modules. So you had to really go out of your way to collect and gather as a DM, specifically if we wanted to run a game, to gather this material. And I guess Gary Gygax and the early game designers really loved tables, so there's a lot of table materials. If you look at the Dungeon Master's Guide, for first edition, there's all these tables for everything, attack rolls. But I think second edition streamlined it really well, with the exception of Thaco. Some people really don't like Thaco. Thaco is a little esoteric, but it's not hard to pick up. And I talked about this before, so I won't really regurgitate the same material. You can check the old videos on that. But the Dungeon Master's Guide for second edition, I think, although not as solid or not as informational or not as great as the first edition, in my opinion, does have some advantages going to it. Specifically, I was looking at this morning how it's very flavorful, and it talks about, for example, there's a whole section in there on money and coins, and it talks about treasure and the currency and how to convert. Tells the DM how to convert currency, how to award money, the differences between the types of coins available to players. And this is information that is also available in every subsequent edition of the game and subsequent DM guides, but it's not as detailed, and what's missing, for example, if I looked at the fourth edition Dungeon Master, both the Dungeon Master's Guide and the Player's Handbook, to refresh myself, there's the usual, I think there's like one page that talks about coin conversion and converting into the different types of currencies. But if you look at the second edition Dungeon Master's Guide under money, there is like a whole section on just the coins, and it gives you they have the usual sections about money and magic treasure and what the adventurer players can earn after each encounter or adventure. But the second edition Dungeon Master's Guide goes way deep into the historical part. It talks about how coin and currency were used in the Middle Ages and in the older times, and it's very flavorful and very historical, and it does not compare with any of the. I mean, I don't want to knock 5e or any of the other systems, because that's not what I'm here for today. But none of the subsequent materials on coin, money, and monetary systems in the game even compare to the second edition description. So there's that. In addition to that, but I'm not here to talk about the Dungeon Master Guide or the core groups per se. I'm here to talk about my favorite supplements. And one thing that second edition is known for is a whole wide of campaigns that were made available to the players that never even existed before, like Dark Sun and like Dragonlands, of course. They expanded on the Forgotten Realms, so there were just some, actually, if I open the book again, there's an advertisement for the different campaigns. So you have the Forgotten Realms, Ravenloft, again, thanks to the Count. He made an appearance today in our stream. But Ravenloft was the campaign that was really developed for and specifically during the second edition. And you had the Dark Sun campaign. You had Aquadim. You had Greyhawk Adventures. I mean, Greyhawk is like pretty awesome. And all of this stuff were Spelljammers, which was more of it was like successful, but more like D&D in space, kind of like combining D&D fantasy with space. And, it's a little out there, but it's been done before. When you think of the X-Men, you think of that type of high fantasy. So all of these different settings just came about, but to me, the best one is Dragonlands. I mean, you can't really compare in my opinion, the supplements that came out and the rich amount of material that you can go back from second edition. For example, I picked up at the hobby store the guidebook to Totalitas, and I also got supplements for it. There's Totalitas, and it talks about the Minotaurs. And basically, if you're not familiar with Dragonlands, Totalitas is like a whole different continent. It's still part of the campaign setting, but it's a whole different continent where different conflicts bound. And they just expanded it with like more races and with like the Minotaurs and different things that you can do in the setting. I also got like Unsung Heroes, relatively cheap. These are all published around early 1990, 91, around that time when second edition was taken off. And Unsung Heroes is really great because it's a supplement that gives you NPCs. So basically, they have a number of NPCs that you can incorporate into your campaign. For example, there's Morandar, who's like a ninth level ranger, and he is pretty proficient with different types of weapons. And Morandar is a man in his late 30s. His brown hair is well kept and cut above his brow. This is all description coming from the book, and it gives you like a picture of each character or each NPC, and it tells you what their attitudes are and what their background is. And I think this is something that second edition did really well, like put together elements of a game world. I mean, world building is part of D&D, but it's really hard. Some DMs may not have the time or put the energy or effort into creating their own campaign, so they don't really have to. If they can just pick up a supplement book like the Unsung Heroes, if they want to I mean, they can make up their own world, but if they want to populate it with some ready to go, I guess you can think of them as pre-made NPCs, NPC pre-mades, something like that. But they have all kinds of different levels, different classes. Like you'll have Selwyn, who's like your second level mage, for example. And it talks about Valo Downhills, who's a scout thief. So you have all these pre-made characters that your players can interact with. Jelani, who's a second level mage, and it tells you her proficiencies. It tells you her armor that she wears, the weapons that she can use, the equipment that she favors, and it talks about her background. This is something that came back again with, and was actually integrated into 5th edition, where background actually it's more than just your background, because there is a role-playing element to 2nd edition and to every RPG, of course. But in 5th edition, your background gives you a little added bonuses, and depending on which race you are, a sub-race, you can do things that other characters can't do. So here we have Karathos, the 3rd level fighter Minotaur. He's proficient with a battle axe. He wears a chainmail +1 as his armor, and his favorite weapons are the battle axe, and he has a knife, and some other things that he uses. So it really is a good supplement specifically for Dragonland setting, but you can use it in any setting of Dungeons and Dragons. Really, you could plop this NPCs and add so much flavor and so much rich material to an ongoing campaign, and NPCs for your player characters to interact with, which is great. I picked up the rule book Totalitas, and it sort of talks about what the rules are for that specific continent, because there are some things that in Totalitas don't really happen in other more famous parts of the Dragonlance setting, like such as Krim, for example. In Totalitas, you don't have I mentioned you have the Minotaurs and you have the goblins. You have basically some races that you don't really find in the other parts of the continent, which is really cool. And this supplement specifically, it gives you like player character kits. Now, character kits were kind of a controversial late addition to 2nd edition, where you can customize the different classes and subclasses for your player characters. And then you add more proficiencies, you add more skills, you add more, I didn't call them skills, but you add more things that the characters can do. And you could customize it, so they call it a kit. And it's kind of like a build, like a pre-made build, like in an MMO where people are making their builds. It's kind of like a thing like that. But the rulebook of Totalitas, this specific supplement, has a great amount of additions, but it also has some player character kits that you can add and customize, which is really great. They're there for you if you want to make the kits. If you don't really are into making kits or builds, then you don't really need to use it, but it's available. And then lastly, the last thing I wanted to point out, it's not an official supplement per se. I mean, it is under the TSR banner, but it's called the leaves from the Inn of the Last Home, and this is not Totalitas related, but it's related to Kryn, and which is the most, I guess, Kryn is like the most famous lore when it comes to the Dragonlance setting, you know. And this book is kind of like, it's a supplement that's light on mechanics but heavy on lore. So if you like the lore of the game settings and you really specifically are looking for Dragonlance lore, yeah, you can pick up the Dragonlands Adventures. And actually, a lot of the information that is in Dragonlands Adventures for first edition is actually found in this supplement in the leaves from the Inn of the Last Home. By Margaret Wise and Tracy Hickman, again. But it's kind of a source book that's a complete source book for the Dragonlance Kryn part of the campaign setting. But it's, like I said, it's not heavy on mechanics. It's more talking about lore, and it gives you, for example, there's the manuscript of Dunstan Van Eyre, and it talks about the companions. And if you read the novels, you know the companions are the famous party that goes out and adventures in the Dragonlance universe. And then there's a whole chapter on legends and myths, where it talks about the Hammer of Kyros, you know, all the legends that you'll find in this Kryn universe or Kryn campaign setting. And then he has a great addition of maps, so you can you can find maps for Ancelon before the war and Ancelon after the war. It even has something on the constellations, which are heavily affecting some of the mythology and some of the gods in the universe. And what I really like about it is it has some songs and some essays. The essays are really great. So they talk about, you know, the marriage of Riverwind and Goldmoon. And again, if you know Dragonlance, you know Riverwind and Goldmoon were a couple, part of the companions. And it gives like the whole legend of how they got married. And there's a section from Tika's cookbook. So Tika and the Gully Dwarves make a heavy presence in Kryn. Anyway, there's a lot of lore. If you like and enjoy the lore, and I'm looking for a supplement that is a really great companion, it's called the Leaves from the Inn of the Last Home, because the Last Home is an inn that's mentioned in the Dragonlance setting. And if you want a good companion with the early modules and the first edition Dragonlance Adventures source book, you have to pick this book up. I actually found it by accident at a hobby store in Houston, and I bought it for like $1 or something. And it's a great book, and it was in great shape, and it's something like, I want to say, over 200, almost 300 pages of just pure, rich flavor that you can add to a Dragonlance campaign. So there you have it, guys. Those are some of my favorite, if not my... Oh, one last thing. I almost forgot to mention the Tome of Magic, second edition Tome of Magic. And I've talked about Magic before, how it works in the different editions of D&D. I'm not going to really get into it too much in this video because it's already kind of getting like to be a long dissertation. But suffice it to say, the Tome of Magic, it's a great addition to the core books of the second edition, because it just gives you additional spells and additional magic items and uses for your different types of magic users. In first and second edition, the one thing that was different from the later editions is that you had the classifications of the classes, like I talked about before, and you can look at my earlier videos if you want more explanation of that. But essentially, you had your clerics, which were in one subclass of magic users, your clerics and your druids, and then you had your wizards and your illusionists. They didn't really have warlocks, I don't think, in second edition. I could be wrong, but they had definitely had like the different kinds of spellcasters and wizards. And one thing they didn't have the domains that they do like in fifth edition. They didn't have domain for clerics, for example, but they did have the different schools. So you'll have your school of divination, and the 8 different, I think it was 8 schools: divination and conjugation and necromancy. So you have specialties within the spells. And what this supplement does, it really expands into that. It gives you additional spells, and it gives you a lot of more detail on the magic, the way magic is conducted, refereed, or arbitrated in the second edition, which is a little different, that definitely different than the spell slots and the way they do it in the modern fifth edition. I kind of like it better because, in a way, there's some aspects of it that I like better, in the sense that um, the spells, there's in some of the spells, when you're conjuring up a spell, depending on concentration, there's a high chance that you can fail. See, one of the things I don't like about, I've sat in a couple of fifth edition games, and when there's a spellcaster or wizard casting a spell, the spell always works. Like I say, 99% of the time, the spell goes off without a hitch. And the DM never says, okay, make a roll for concentration, even though sometimes, the character might be in a precarious situation. They might be trying to avoid a pursuit in battle or whatever. The monster has some kind of advantage. And so first and second edition, well, specifically second edition, the magic user would have to roll in a lot of times in order to see if the concentration was broken or if the spell went off without a hitch. And there was a percentage chance of the spell not coming off. So they could actually burn a spell and waste a spell without any effect. And in some of the modern games, I don't know if I don't remember that mechanics is in 5th edition or not, but the DM almost always automatically lets the spellcaster or the player cast a spell. And there's no, like I said, they don't make a concentration check. They don't have to, there's no possibility of failing. The spell always goes off, because I guess it's more exciting to have the spell happen and to see what the outcome is, the damage to the monster or the enemy. But it's not realistic to me that there's no chance for spell failure. So I really like that mechanic, and that's a second edition mechanic that don't remember if it was in first edition, but it's definitely in second edition, and it's not common, or I haven't seen it common, at least in practice, in the modern game. So there you have it, guys. Those are my favorite supplements for second AD&D second edition. One of my favorite versions of Dungeons and Dragons. I hope you enjoyed the retrospect and the look back. And you can find some of these supplements online or at different places. Your hobby store may not stock them, but you can order some of them. You can find them online for sure. And so, thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned. This series will continue, and next time we're going to be looking at the supplements for the very first edition of Dungeons and Dragons. So stay tuned for that. If you like this video and this content, go ahead and hit the like. Don't forget to like or subscribe, and I will talk to you guys then. Have a great Halloween day and night. All right, guys, it occurred to me that I talked about the supplements, but I didn't really show you exactly what's in some of these. So just real quick, when I was talking about the different characters or the NPCs that are available in Unsung Heroes, for example, for second edition, you have here's Fester, who's a second level thief, and you get her a nice illustration of the character. And then you get her race and alignment, or all her pertinent statistics and equipment and description. And they're all like this. It's like pages and pages just describing the different character options. Like Hilmar, 6th level fighter. It gives you all his proficiencies, a description, and nice illustration of what the character looks like. And you got the Curie of the Sirens. I don't know how you say that. Curie of the Sirens, probably. She's a 10th level fighter, and there she is, looking pretty badass in her illustration. You got her stats, pretty decent AC, which is armor class of 3. So that tells you she has some magical armor at her disposal. There are all her stats, including her THAC0 and her attitudes and background. So the whole book is a treasure trove. It's a treasure trove for second edition NPCs. And then we have The book of Totalitas I talked about, which is a continental Totalitas, and it describes what that's all about. And of course, Dragonlands Adventures is the famous one by Tracy Hickman and Margaret Weiss, which started it all. But it's not really, as I mentioned, a second edition supplement. But you can use it for your second edition campaigns, although it came out earlier in like 1987. So just wanted to have a quick look at what some of the supplements look like, which I didn't get a chance to do earlier in the video.